Today we're speaking with Professor Michael Puett, who teaches Chinese history and anthropology at Harvard University. He's the author of 4 incredible books and personally my Chinese historiography professor during my fall semester here at Harvard. This conversation is a part of the Society for Perception Studies speaker series, where we explore the ideas that change how we see the world and celebrate the people, especially the educators, who make that shift possible. Thank you so much for being here, Michael.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for all you're doing.
Your class was one of my favorite classes that I've ever taken, so it means a lot to have you here.
Well, in truth, if there was anything to the class, it was because you have this amazing ability just with your comments, your questions, even the tones of voice you use in the classroom to just shift the entire discussion of the classroom and raise the level, truly.
I mean, you make it really easy to be, you make it really easy to be an engaged student, so thank you. I actually took your class not because I had a specific interest in China, but because I just thought encountering a different worldview might help inform the learning architecture that I've been building in my master's work. And I especially loved that it was a historiography course. So not just about historical events, but how the story is told and the ideas that emerge from that. And I think that encountering history from that perspective for the first time really changed how I think about how knowledge itself is constructed. And your classes have clearly resonated with a lot of students at Harvard. You teach one of the top 3 most popular courses in the entire university. Hundreds of students fill lecture halls to learn about Chinese philosophy. And a lot of students have said that your class has been life-changing. Why do you think so many students are drawn to it?
Oh, I think part of what is so exciting about these Chinese philosophers is they're all about asking, why is it that we fall into patterns that can define our entire existence, define what we see, don't see in the world, the relationships we form, and how can we change those? How can we improve the relationships? How can we learn to see more of the world? How can we learn to interact in the world more effectively? And they're incredibly practical. So I think this reason students are drawn to them is that it's just an incredible vision of how through training and cultivation, we can develop much more extraordinary possibilities than we tend sadly to do in our usual daily existence.
When Hayes and I came to your office hours and asked you about what sparked your interest in studying China, you told us the story that we loved about how you grew up in Nashville near a library. Would you mind sharing that story again?
Oh, absolutely. So I was always this voracious reader growing up, mainly reading novels and poetry, which I still absolutely love. But at a certain point I realized, being a native English speaker, I was reading things in English, which was wonderful, but I wanted to learn about the rest of the world. So I decided to start going to the local library and literally going from section to section. It was arranged by geographical area, learning the world. And it was extraordinary, I mean, truly life-changing. And I fell in love with all of the literatures, philosophies, ideas, religions from around the world, and then decided to start learning some other languages. And I've ended up continuing to fall in love with these ideas and have ultimately become a teacher to try to give to my students a sense of just the extraordinary richness of these philosophies.
I actually see that curiosity really reflected in your teaching style and how open you are to your students and their questions and their comments and just their perspectives. And I also think it's just so important that you took yourself out of the predominantly Western canon that we all pretty much grow up in and exposed yourself to alternate ways of thinking and seeing. And for me, that raises a bigger question about how we understand other cultures. The class I took with you in the fall, we studied the giants of Western thought, Marx, Weber, Durkheim, Grenet, and they all tried to explain China. But it seemed like China became a way of projecting their own Western fears and anxieties of stagnation, of tradition, things like that. So what do we actually gain from studying a culture through those perspectives?
I think you are exactly right. I mean, when you read the great, extraordinary Western thinkers of the 19th and 20th centuries, thinkers who largely define how many people in America and Europe just now commonsensically think about the world, it is horrifying, despite their brilliance, it is horrifying to see the ways they read other cultures. And I think it's helpful for us to go back and read them, because when we just commonly make these statements about so-called non-Western societies, we often don't realize that those came out of these horrible stereotypes that arose largely in 19th century Europe during the height of imperialism. And it's very helpful for students to see that, hopefully be horrified by that, and then hopefully from that ask, okay, what if we actually study these religions and philosophies themselves? And what if we devote ourselves to trying to learn from other cultures as opposed to imposing our values upon them?
And I think I didn't realize till your class how much all of our knowledge is really based in 19th century imperial expansion. And I think even learning about how we misread China, we could even ask about what would it be like to understand China on its own terms? And is it even actually possible at all to understand another country or other people on their own terms without our own inherited frameworks?
I think you're absolutely right that the goal is to understand other cultures on their own terms. I don't think it's ever going to be purely possible to do so, but instead of doing what, as you mentioned before, we tend to do, which is simply impose our values upon other cultures, imagine if we actually tried to train ourselves to honestly try to learn from other cultures, in which case we're thinking of it more as a dialogue. So when you see different ideas, different values, or sometimes surprisingly very common ideas, but worked out in very, very different ways and different practices, how can we learn from that? And how can we learn from the dialogues that develop because of that? Now, that may sound absurdly utopian. At the same time, I found in the classroom, it actually is possible. So, as you mentioned before, in classrooms in America, virtually everything that is assigned is based upon Western frameworks that, again, as you said, are largely from the 19th century imperial period. Most of their readings fully assume that worldview. And yet, if in the classroom you actually assign works, even granted in translation, so it's already being filtered into an English-speaking world, but even so, I found students absolutely just become incredibly excited by these new ideas. They start bringing it into these ideas into their daily practices, and already just within a 2 to 3 month period of a semester, you can begin seeing the excitement. And if that's true even in 2 to 3 months, imagine what that can mean over the course of a lifetime. So we'll never totally understand a single given culture purely in its terms, but can we do the dialogic work of working across and learning from other cultures? I think absolutely yes, and I think one sees it even in a classroom that goes on for, again, only 2 to 3 months.
In your book, The Path, you draw on these ancient Chinese thinkers to reframe how we approach life. And something that comes up is this idea of identity and the Western concept of finding yourself. Like there's some fixed self beneath all these layers that we have to somehow discover. So do you think that that's a productive endeavor, this pursuit to find yourself?
I think it can be an incredibly dangerous endeavor. Now, let me immediately say there can be good sides to it that I'll come back to. The good sides are the obvious ones, the ones that we correctly focus on. We will say, well, if I look within and find myself and find my true self, then that's the basis by which I can question social conventions because I'm just going to focus on me. And sure, there's a liberatory side to that. However, getting back to the heart of your question, I also think that way of thinking about it, which is the common way in America of thinking about it, is incredibly dangerous. Because oftentimes what we're really doing when I say I should look within, find myself, love and embrace what I am, love my good sides, love my bad sides, because it's just me, what we're really saying is, I will love what I currently claim to be, even if it's an accurate description of what I am. What if, going back to Chinese philosophy, a lot of what I am is just based in part on patterns, oftentimes very negative and reductive patterns I've fallen into, and then I'm telling myself I should love and embrace a bunch of patterns I fell into bad habits that I fell into from a very young age, which of course would be absurd. If I have bad habits, and assuredly I do, then surely I should try to break them and train myself and grow from them and become something greater than I currently am. And so yes, part of what I love about Chinese philosophy is the focus is on training ourselves to be something incomparably greater than we currently are. And the key is it's not focused on me, it's focused on how through building extraordinary relationships I can, with others, build worlds where we all can flourish. So it's not focused on just me, and it's not focused on what I just happen to be right now. It's all about how I can connect and build much, much, much more extraordinary worlds.
So who we are right now is technically just a mess of ruts and habits that we've fallen into that we think is ourselves.
Exactly.
And these habits can become so naturalized that we don't even see them anymore. They become invisible. So
completely.
What would you say is the mechanism to making these habits visible? Is this where ritual comes in?
Yes. So one of the things that the Chinese philosophers will strongly emphasize is ritual. And in America, even you mention the word ritual, and people will immediately think, oh, that's terrible, because ritual tells me what to do, and I want to be following my true self and do whatever I want to do. The reason Chinese philosophers will emphasize ritual is precisely because they'll say, no, if we are capable of becoming something far greater than a bunch of bad habits we've fallen into, it's in ritual where we do the training work. And so they will strongly say you need to be developing daily rituals where you are constantly breaking your perspective, training yourself, opening your eyes, breaking the habitual ways we operate in the world. And it's through that training exercise that you begin to see these horrible habits, and you begin to really start developing extraordinary relationships and beginning to really see the world.
In class, we talked about Max Weber's iron cage, how life can feel like this endless loop of working and achieving without really knowing why. And he traces it back to this sort of religious anxiety in early Protestant Europe, where people didn't really know if they were chosen by God, and there wasn't really a way to find out. So they just kept working and working in hopes that their discipline might somehow mean they were amongst the chosen. Do you feel like there's some modern version of that anxiety playing out today?
I do. I think Weber's reading of this is profoundly onto something. So often we think the danger of a modern capitalist world is that we're simply endlessly trying to gain wealth. And I think part of the power of Weber is he correctly noticed actually a lot of our anxieties go way beyond any actual possible acquisition of wealth, and that would be bad enough. But his argument is actually no, a lot of the world of anxieties we live in, exactly as you said, come from these early Calvinistic ideas that we're predestined to be in heaven or hell. There's nothing we can do. So that's already predetermined. And then it creates this anxiety where if I just endlessly work all the time, then presumably that must mean I'm one of the chosen people who will go to heaven. And so you're working way beyond any even practical reason to be working. And I think he's absolutely right about that. It just creates, as you said, this iron cage of modernity where it's
like a rat
process.
race.
Yes, this total rat race without even, so we often think it's a rat race to gain rewards. That would be bad enough, but he's arguing actually the rat race is a world unto itself, even when there are no practical benefits gained from doing this.
So do you think worldly achievement is kind of a secularized version of that anxiety?
Very much. I think he is profoundly right about this. And if he's right about this, then it raises exactly the questions you're asking. How could we think of other ways to live in the world? What are the implicit values that led to this world? And if we're not satisfied with them, and I certainly am not, what are the other ideas, practices, values that we could begin actively incorporating?
But I wonder if orienting yourself around bettering yourself rather than proving yourself, whether that whole anxiety structure collapses, because at that point you would be improving yourself instead of proving yourself.
And I love that phrasing. And yes, I think if we focus on improving ourselves rather than proving ourselves, I think that's a beautiful phrasing of it. I think it changes everything. And part of what's intriguing in the Chinese tradition is they will talk, and I think this is absolutely right in practice, is that once you start training yourself to begin really connecting with others, as opposed to, as you said, you're trying to prove yourself in terms of what others are thinking about you, you immediately start developing these incomparably stronger connections in which we and those around us are truly growing, and it just quickly begins to build on itself, this sense of creating a greater world.
That actually reminds me of something that came up the other day in Professor Unger in your class, this idea of vitality.
Yes.
And it was funny because he was speaking to us as if we all had the same definition of it, or we all understood it in the same way, which is the modern conception of it, which is the 19th century romantic, sort of loud breaking out of structure.
Exactly.
And it made me think about how etymologically vitality just means life force. And in my religious tradition, life force is something that's directly connected to the heart and the work of purifying it. So those two feel like opposite directions to me. One is looking outside of yourself to feel alive, sort of even deifying your desires, which could give you the illusion of life force. And then the other one is like quietly cultivating something within. So how do you think about that tension between borrowing life force or borrowing this feeling of aliveness from relationships, work, whatever feels most immediate and exciting, and treating it as something that we can actually grow from inside?
I love the contrast you're drawing, and just to underline it, yes, I do think in America in particular, we have a tendency to think of vitality in exactly the way you mentioned. So it's me as an individual grabbing more for myself, breaking from social conventions, and somehow that means I'm more alive, I am more vital. It's all about me and my personal greatness. And I think that is, to even call it a low-level form of vitality might be overly polite, in fact. I think it actually destroys your energies, actually. And like you, I'm very moved from so many other traditions in the world that on the contrary, we'll talk about, no, energy is all about the training and cultivation that allows us to energize literally the world around us. So in the Chinese tradition, they will say, well, think of spirits above as purely refined energies, and the highest would be the most highly refined energy. And what we are doing is training ourselves and cultivating ourselves to become, in a very literal sense, more spiritual. Our energies become more spiritual, and it's all through the training. And with that training, getting back to the heart of your point, it's all about connection. So it's not about, look at me, look how powerful I am. It's not about power, it's not about me. It's about training these energies and then truly connecting with others and with a larger world.
It also makes me think about religion, and I feel like the modern definition of religion today is very connected to the sense of identity or something you have to defend.
Yes.
And I think when you look at it as something, or when you look at it as an identity, you miss the beauty of it as a practice. Do you think that shift from identity to practice changes how we should even view religion or understand religion?
I agree completely. And just first to underline your opening points, yes, so often now we think of religion as identity. I am X as opposed to Y, and it has all the dangers you've mentioned. And here too, there is a history to this. In much of the world, what we could, and I correctly, I think, refer to as religious practices weren't done in this form of I am X as opposed to Y, I am right, you are wrong. These were practices, and the more we can begin focusing on the practices is the more we can truly open up the power of these traditions. And once you're focusing on practices, it allows the kind of this is going to strain English, the practice form of dialogue that we were discussing before, because a lot of these ritual practices, they work across cultures, and they're getting at very comparable sets of issues. And if you're not thinking of this, as you said, religion versus that religion, but you're thinking of practices through which we can grow, then it changes absolutely everything.
And in ancient China, when you talk about ritual, there was this one that really struck me, which is that role reversal, the no blushing. Do you mind explaining a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a very, as you said, telling example of the way ritual is being thought of in early China. So in the ritual, it's about a father and a son, although it can be done with any family member, any friend. It can be done with gods. It can be done with other humans. It can be done with animals. But in this particular example, it's a father-son. And the key is when they walk into the ritual space without, as you said, blushing, they cannot blush because they literally become a different person. So the father becomes the son of his own son, the son becomes the father of his own father, and each is therefore forced to relate to the other one in the precise opposite subject position than they would be occupying outside the ritual. And the idea of being forced to do this role reversal on a regular basis means, instead of the usual patterns that can sadly set in across generations in a family, how do you break those dynamics? You literally become the other person. You literally see the world from the opposite perspective. You literally relate to the person with whom you often will have a very tension-filled relationship. And you relate to that person, but you relate to them from the exact opposite subject position. And the argument is, and I think in practice this is absolutely right, if you're doing this on a regular basis, very quickly you see the degree to which the world outside the ritual is just a bunch of, as you said, bad habits we've fallen into. And once you sense that, and sense the degree to which that is now defining our lives, in this case defining this relationship, is the degree to which you can finally begin changing it.
I love that idea of the role reversal and sort of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, but in a sacred space.
Exactly.
And I think maybe it's been psychologized today, like I think there's different words for it, like cognitive diffusion, but I love the idea that something could be a thing, and the way that you look at it could be very different from the way that somebody else looks at it, and then deliberately putting yourself in those positions where you're seeing that same thing that is unchanging change just through the way we see.
Precisely, and I love the way you phrase it, because as you said, when we think of things like this, cognitively trying to understand the world from other perspectives, that's obviously important, but as you said, we're thinking about it purely like me, Michael, trying to understand the world from the point of view of Herman. Now that's good to a certain level, but this, as you said, goes far more, because if it's in a ritual context, I literally become, to stick with that example, Herman in my embodied state. So it's not just me thinking this way, which probably means I'm not really taking Herman's perspective whatsoever. It's rather I am embodied and relating to the person who was Herman outside that ritual, and I am truly gaining a sense of that perspective in a fully embodied sense. And I agree, it's so much more moving than simply the cognitive, I'll see the world from Herman's view. Yes.
I think I have since I've taken your class, I feel like I've developed some more rituals to be more of a noticer and more connected to myself in a way that kind of breaks the structures that I've inherited. And I think one of those, which we were just talking about before the interview, was prayer, and sort of coming back to center and realizing that we're small compared to this universe. And even in that realization, there's so much gratitude. And I think gratitude as a lens could be very useful. It could be a perceptual position. And I feel like I constantly try to create new rituals that break me out of my patterns. But I think the important thing is noticing the patterns. Do you have any rituals?
Like you, I try to do them constantly. And it is striking, and I mean this literally when I first started reading these classical Chinese philosophical texts, striking in the sense that I realized the degree to which, I'll just give a standard example, like when I would walk to the bus when I was young, or now when I walk to school to teach, it is amazing how little of the world we actually see. It is amazing in our daily relationships the degree to which we're really not connecting to those around us whatsoever. And once you begin to sense that, and once you begin to do these rituals that are all about training you to really try to connect and really try to see the world, it changes everything. So like you, I'm doing this constantly. Just when sticking with that earlier example, if I'm walking to school to teach in the morning, I'm training myself to actively begin to see the world. When I'm interacting with people, I'm trying to train myself to actively do so. I think prayer is a wonderful example where you're developing, as you said, the disposition of gratitude, which is something we would like to say we feel all the time, but we really don't. And you're actively cultivating that. And once you're cultivating through ritual these dispositions, these sensibilities for the world, those around one, then it just becomes slowly a part of your everyday existence, where in our mundane living, suddenly you are, well, not suddenly, over the course of the training, you begin truly connecting and seeing the world and feeling gratitude and seeing the larger world, as opposed to simply what I
Right,
need
because
right
we
now.
all kind of walk around sort of unconscious.
Exactly.
And I feel like even putting myself in your Chinese historiography class or going into something like a poetry class, which I'm taking this semester, which I wouldn't have usually taken, just exposing myself to these new ways of seeing so that I can do even like close readings in poetry where it just feels like nothing is beneath the attention of a poet, and having to extract meaning and come at it through a posture of humility as a perceptual lens, where you're not sure where meaning might appear, instead of kind of leading with a posture of authority, which sometimes we're encouraged to do, like, you know, have a position, defend it. But I think having humility as a perceptual lens is so much more generative.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. And I love your image of reading as a ritual. And I think that's right. I mean, we're often trained when we read, and I'll give a standard example, a classroom example, where you'll be assigned a text and the training is, I'll flip through it quickly, find my line on it so I can say, this author is wrong because of X. And then I raise my hand, say that because I've proven my authority, and then I've done my work. And on the contrary, if we think of reading as a ritual, and I think poetry is a perfect example of this, to read poetry, we are training ourselves to focus on every word because it's written by a poet who did that. And it's focusing on every word, focusing on the nuances. It takes reading and rereading. Every new reading, we see depths that we didn't see in the original reading. And it forces one to not come in and be the authority, I'm going to say X. It rather makes one be the figure who's listening and learning from the piece. So I love this. I think reading should be thought of as a ritual, and poetry is a great example of something that really pushes that upon us. It forces us to be open to what it's doing, because if we go in with our standard authoritative mode of reading, you literally cannot make sense of a poem.
It feels like everything we've talked about sort of comes back to this idea that to change how we live, we have to change how we see. And I really like that in your teachings, that change doesn't have to come from these big shifts, but it actually comes from these small, daily, ritualistic shifts of changing how you notice, changing how you respond, changing how you reflect, that break us out of the patterns that we fall into. And even seeing life as a process of transformation than this teleological thing where we have to achieve certain goals. So yeah, thank you so much for making all these complex ideas so accessible and easy to apply.
But thank you for all that you are doing. Truly, going back to the classroom, you've clearly developed a practice wherein in the classroom, you sense the discussion going on, and you just sense perfectly how to raise a comment, how to raise a question that opens up the entire discussion. And that's a sign of someone who is actively putting this into practice. So thank you for all that you're doing in the classroom.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for these discussions that you're organizing, and thank you for all of the pedagogical work that you are doing for the world.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for being our first Society for Perception Studies speaker.
It is truly an honor, and the good news is by starting with me, there's no place to go but up. So